My mother was a butterfly baby. The slightest touch could tear her skin, leaving painful blisters and weeping sores. To protect her, my father lined our entire house in expensive silk. Nothing sharp was allowed inside. I loved painting, but brushes were banned. I loved music, but violins were forbidden. Every dream I ever had was snuffed out before it could even begin, all because of my mother's illness. My father always looked at me with that tired, pleading expression. Your mother is sick, Mia. You have to be patient with her. But back then, I was only 4 years old. I remember the day I came home from school. The moment I walked through the door, my mother slapped me across the face. Hard. For no reason at all. Before I could even cry, everyone rushed to her side. My father pointed an accusing finger at my face. Look what you did to your mother's hand. Why are you always so selfish? He slapped my other cheek, then scooped up my mother, whose fingers were already bleeding, and ran out of the house to the hospital. I was thrown against the coffee table. Suddenly, my own skin began to split, weeping blood just like hers. And in that terrifying moment, the doctor's words from my physical exam the previous year finally clicked. She carries the genetic markers for EB. It could activate at any time. My vision began to fade. Blood pooled on the floor around me. Mia! What did you do to upset your mother this time? My father came rushing down the stairs, catching the tail end of my mother's hand swinging down to strike me again. He didn't care about the red, swollen mark burning on my cheek. There was no questioning, no benefit of the doubt, only accusation, disappointment, and pure exhaustion in his eyes. He shoved me aside roughly to get to her. Holding her hand with delicate care, he stared at the tiny tears forming in her fragile skin, his eyes wide with a desperate, all-consuming devotion. Then he turned back to me, his gaze freezing cold. He grabbed a ceramic mug from the counter and hurled it at my feet. It shattered, pieces flying. How many times do I have to tell you, he roared. Do not upset your mother. Does it just go in one ear and out the other? Her condition is fragile. Look at her hand, it's tearing. Is your face made of stone or something? I lay on the floor, a strange, agonizing pain blooming deep inside my bones. It was a sensation I had never felt before, accompanied by a faint, horrifying crackling sound beneath my skin. I stared at him, my eyes wide with disbelief. I was the one who had just been struck. My mother clung to his chest, her eyes locked onto me. There was a dark, unreadable intensity in her gaze. She screamed at me the minute she walked in, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Tom, I don't want her here. Send her away. Just get her out of my sight. She dissolved into hysterical screams, hurling venomous words at me. The sheer hatred in her eyes made it feel as though we weren't mother and daughter at all, but mortal enemies. I lay on the cold floor. Even though she had never given me a single warm look in my entire life, my heart felt like it was physically bleeding. My father looked at her bleeding palms, watching her lose control, and shook his head at me in utter disgust. I am so disappointed in you, Mia. But when he looked back down at her, his voice instantly softened into a gentle whisper. Shoo, it's okay, sweetheart. I'll send her away tonight. I promise you'll never have to look at her again. He lifted her gently in his arms and hurried out the door. My grandparents followed close behind, passing by me without casting a single glance in my direction. And my mother, looking over his shoulder at me, seemed to let out a long, quiet sigh of relief. I lay collapsed on the floor, the pain rising like a tidal wave, freezing my limbs. Dad. Dad. I reached out a trembling hand toward the empty doorway, my voice barely a cracked whisper. As I raised my arm, I finally realized where that strange, cracking sound was coming from. I watched in horror as the skin on my hand split open, raw and red. Terror surged through my veins. The skin on my back, where I had slammed hard against the floor, was already soaked through with warm, wet blood. The metallic smell of blood filled my nose. I dragged my heavy body toward the front door, crying out with what little strength I had left. Help, please, someone help me. Tears spilled over my cheeks, and the moment the salt touched my fragile skin, it split open instantly. I left a thick, smeared trail of red behind me as I crawled. But just a few feet from the door, my body gave up. As I lay there in the quiet, my mind drifted back through the years, playing memories of this house like a broken reel. For as long as I could remember, I knew my mother was different. Not just because of her fragile skin, but because other mothers loved their children. Mine hated me. She saw me as a threat, a stain on her perfect world. When I was 6, I showed an incredible talent for painting. The dean of a prestigious art academy had even offered to take me on as his personal student. I had run home, clutching the professional brushes he had gifted me, only for my mother to snatch them and throw them to the floor. What are you trying to do? She had screamed, backing away. Are you trying to kill me? If I die, then everyone will look at you, is that what you want? The stiff bristles had grazed her hand, leaving tiny red scratches. I had stood there, frozen in fear, as my father rushed home to bandage her. He looked down at me and sighed. Mia, your mother can't have things like this in the house. No more painting. It ends today. My eyes had filled with tears, but my tears never mattered. And just like that, my talent was buried when I was only 6 years old. The sudden buzzing of my phone on the table pulled me back from the edge of consciousness. I tried to crawl toward it, but my body felt glued to the floor by my own drying blood. The caller didn't have much patience. After 5 short rings, the line went dead. I let my head fall back, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. The bleeding wouldn't stop. The tears wouldn't stop. My mind kept drifting. I was 10 when a music teacher at an after-school program discovered I had a perfect ear. While other kids struggled to read sheet music, I could recreate any melody after hearing it just once. Desperate for a scrap of approval, I had run to my father. I want to learn the piano. I know Mom can't touch anything sharp or heavy, but we can put it in my room, okay? My father hesitated, looking like he might actually say yes. But then, my mother's voice shrieked from the top of the stairs. Absolutely not. I looked up, terrified by the sheer venom on her face. She stared down at me, suddenly hitting herself, muttering things under her breath that I couldn't make out. Her fragile skin quickly bruised and split under her own blows, oozing blood. For the second time in my life, I was paralyzed with fear. My father rushed up the stairs, grabbing her wrists to stop her from hurting herself. Okay. No piano. She won't learn. I turned around and caught the faint, triumphant smirk spreading across my mother's face. My heart sank into a dark, bottomless pit. After my father finished bandaging her, I went back to my room. I sat by the window, staring at an old photograph of my mother from before I was born. She looked so different then. Suddenly, the door was kicked open, slamming hard against the wall. My heart leaped into my throat. Why do you want to learn the piano? She whispered, her face twisted in a way that made my skin crawl. She grabbed my shoulders, her sharp fingernails digging deep into my skin. The pain was sharp and blinding. If you play the piano, you think everyone will love you more than me, don't you? At 10 years old, I didn't understand what she meant. I only knew that I loved music, that my shoulders ached, and that I would never be allowed to play. When I didn't answer, she pulled her hands back, her fingers trembling as if she were trying to hold herself back. You are not allowed to learn, she spat. In this house, I come first. Always. If you don't like it, you can pack your things and get out. Do you hear me? I nodded numbly, my knees shaking. She sneered and walked out. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air as the tears finally spilled over. My second dream was dead. The landline answering machine on the wall beeped, snapping me back to the cold reality of the floor. My father's tired, disappointed voice filled the quiet room. Mia, I want you to use tonight to think about what you've done. Your mother is in the ER. The doctors almost couldn't save her hand. I've told you 1,000 times not to upset her, but it's like you don't care at all. She went through hell giving birth to you, and her condition has only gotten worse because of it. You should be grateful. Instead, you constantly pick fights with her. And screaming at her today? I am truly disappointed in you, Mia. The machine beeped again, ending the call. I wanted so badly to call him back. I wanted to beg him to come home and look at the girl lying in a pool of her own blood. But I couldn't move. My eyes grew heavy, the light fading. I breathed slowly, each breath feeling like heavy stones pressing down on my chest. I didn't scream at her, Dad. I didn't do anything, but you never believed me. A final tear slipped from the corner of my eye. When I was 13, my mother did something completely unexpected. She volunteered to attend my parent-teacher conference. But halfway through, as we sat in the classroom, she suddenly snapped. She stood up and began screaming at my teacher. Did she pay you off? How could a stupid, mediocre girl like her get the 3rd highest grade in the class? She cheated, didn't she? I knew it! She dragged me out of my seat, pulling me into the hallway, and slapped me hard. You liar! You cheat! I'll teach you some respect. Teachers, parents, and students all stared in horror. My teacher tried to intervene, but the second she touched my mother's arm, she gasped in shock. Oh my God! Your skin! My classmates looked at us like we were monsters. Eventually, my father arrived, scooping up my bleeding, exhausted mother to rush her to the hospital. He left me standing there alone in the hallway, forced to endure the whispers and dirty looks of everyone around me. From that day on, I didn't have a single friend. Wherever I went, the whispers followed. Look, it's the freak girl. Where's your psycho mom? Tell her to show us her melting skin again. Ha ha. Teenagers could be incredibly cruel. And so, I became quieter, shrinking into the background, trying to disappear. The memory faded. The ceiling light grew dimmer and dimmer. As the answering machine beeped one last time, my eyes closed, and I slid into the quiet, heavy dark. People always say that there is nothing after death. No soul, no consciousness. Just empty nothingness. But I wanted to scream at them. You're wrong. There is a soul. I was floating in the air, looking down at my own body lying in a pool of blood. I looked so small, so fragile, like a leaf that a strong gust of wind could blow away. It was pathetic. My chest tightened. I tried to drift closer to my body, but a sudden, violent pull yanked my consciousness away. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in a hospital room. My mother's hands were freshly bandaged. She sat on the bed, her head bowed. My father stood by the window, staring at his phone after another unanswered call, his brow furrowed. My grandmother stood nearby. The girl still isn't answering? My father gritted, a strange wave of anxiety washing over him. He moved toward the door, but my grandmother stopped him. She did the exact same thing in middle school. Running away for attention. She's so incredibly selfish. My father paused, nodding slowly as if convincing himself. He stepped back into the room. I watched them, a bitter taste in my mouth. Dad, I'm never going to answer your calls again. If you knew, would you actually care? My mother spoke up, her voice eerily calm. Tom, when are you sending her away? My father hesitated. Rose. You don't want to do it, do you? She sat up straight, her face twisting. I said get her out of here. I don't want to see her. My grandmother and father jumped, rushing to soothe her. Okay. I'll arrange it right now. We'll send her to a school in Chicago, okay? Immediately. Calm down, sweetheart. Your bandages are going to tear. My mother took deep, ragged breaths, her eyes wide and hostile. When I was little, I never understood why she hated me so much. Only as I grew older did I realize she hated how much attention my father and grandparents paid to me. She hated my very existence. In this house, she had to be the only princess. I looked down at my translucent hands. I wanted to scream, you got what you wanted. I'm gone. Are you happy now? But no sound came out. The door opened, and the doctor walked in, looking over a clipboard with a grim expression. The mood in the room instantly plummeted. My father stepped forward. Is everything all right? Her immune system is weakening, the doctor said quietly. Her skin condition is only going to get more severe. I strongly advise you to avoid any further stress. Every hard surface in your home needs to be padded or replaced. My father's eyes brimmed with tears. I understand. But that prognosis only solidified his decision to send me away. The moment the doctor left, he called his assistant, Franklin. Find a boarding school in Chicago. I don't care how much it costs. Get Mia's transcripts and transfer papers processed immediately. He hung up and looked at my quiet mother, gently taking her into his arms. Don't worry, honey. It's going to be okay. I'm sending her away. You'll never have to see her again. My mother blinked, giving a faint, quiet nod. A cold, familiar ache spread through my chest. You won't have to fight for his love anymore, Mom. You won. I'm out of your way. That night, my grandparents stayed in the adjoining room. My father turned off the main lights and sat beside my mother's bed. The only light in the dark room came from the pale glow of his phone. I had tried to leave the hospital, but every time I got more than 30 feet away from them, an invisible force snapped me back. I sighed, letting out a dry, hollow laugh. If my mother knew my ghost was haunting them, she would probably hate me even more. My father stared at the screen, looking at the list of missed calls to my number. A sudden, irrational panic seemed to grip him. He opened our chat history. Mia, your mother's condition is getting worse. I've decided to send you to a boarding school in Chicago. Pack your bags tonight. Franklin will pick you up first thing in the morning. Try to be mature about this. I stood beside him, my throat tight. Be mature. I had heard those words my entire life. To my father, my mother was the center of the universe. Even if he found out I was dead, he would probably just sigh and move on. Maybe he'd even be relieved that the source of his wife's misery was finally gone. My father stared at the phone. 5 minutes passed, and when there was still no reply, he let out a frustrated breath. His brow furrowed. Growing increasingly uneasy, he dialed Franklin again. Go to the house now. Check on. Before he could finish the sentence, my mother sat up in bed, gasping in terror. Startled, my father accidentally hit the end call button. On the other end, Franklin looked at his phone, confused by the abrupt disconnect, assuming his boss had dialed by mistake. Mia, my mother shrieked, her eyes wild with panic. My father quickly turned on the lamp, pulling her into his arms. It's okay, it's okay. Mia is gone. I sent her away. My mother slowly calmed down. Don't let her come back. I don't want to see her. I won't, my father promised. I won't let her set foot in New York again. I looked down, my translucent body curling in on itself. For 17 years, my father had believed everything she said without question. When I was 4, she claimed I had tried to poke her with a cake fork. From then on, I was never allowed to have a birthday party. When I was 8, she complained that my hair was too thick and coarse and might scratch her. My father cut my hair into a boy's buzz cut and never let me grow it out. The memories flashed through my mind, cold and biting. The next morning, my father returned to the room with her prescription medication. Just as he pushed the door open, his phone rang. Seeing Franklin's name on the screen, he frowned. Franklin? Did you pick up Mia? Once she's settled in Chicago, I want you to. Sir. Franklin's voice was shaking, high and terrified. My father's heart skipped a beat. His grip on the phone tightened. What is it? You need to come home right now, Franklin choked out, his voice cracking with horror. Mia, she's dead. She's dead on the living room floor. The silence in the hospital room stretched, thin and fragile as spun glass. Tom stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. On the other end, the sound of Franklin's ragged breathing was the only proof that the world hadn't stopped spinning entirely. Sir? Franklin's voice came through again, smaller this time, stripped of all its usual professional composure. Are you there? You need to come home. The police are on their way. I didn't know what else to do. Tom's thumb hovered over the screen. He felt a sudden, bizarre urge to laugh. It was a cold, defensive reflex, a rejection of the reality trying to force its way into his mind. Dead? Mia was 17. She was young, stubborn, and desperately seeking attention. This was another one of her stunts. Like the time she had locked herself in her room for 3 days in middle school, or the time she had deliberately ruined her own clothes just to make them look bad in front of the neighbors. Franklin, Tom said, his voice dropping to a harsh, low whisper. He glanced back at the bed where Rose lay, her head propped against the pillows. If this is another one of Mia's dramatic episodes, I swear to God. It's not an episode, Tom. Franklin yelled, breaking protocol entirely. He had never called his employer by his first name. There is blood everywhere. She's on the floor. She isn't breathing. Her skin, oh God, Tom, her skin is gone. The phone slipped a fraction of an inch in Tom's grip. The sterile, bleach-scented air of the hospital room suddenly felt incredibly heavy, pressing down on his chest. Tom? Who is that? Rose asked from the bed. Her voice was weak, laced with the delicate, demanding cadence she always used when she wanted his undivided attention. Is it Franklin? Did he get her out of the house yet? My head is starting to throb again, and the nurse said I need absolute quiet. Tom slowly lowered the phone, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked at his wife. Her hands, wrapped in pristine white gauze, rested on her lap like fragile sculptures. Beside her, his mother-in-law was busy adjusting the foredrip, her expression sour and impatient. I have to go to the house, Tom murmured. Rose's brow furrowed, her lips thinning into a tight line of displeasure. Now? But you promised you would stay with me until the morning discharge. You know how anxious I get when the doctors shift the shifts. It's about Mia, Tom said, his voice sounding hollow, even to his own ears. Of course it is, Rose spat, turning her face away in disgust. She always finds a way to ruin everything. Even when she's being sent away, she has to make a scene. What did she do now? Did she lock the doors? Did she tear up my silk linens? Rose, please, Tom whispered, a strange, cold knot tightening in his stomach. Go on then, she sighed, waving a bandaged hand dismissively. Go handle your spoiled daughter. Just make sure she's out of my sight by the time I get home. Tomorrow. I don't want to see her face. I mean it, Tom. Tom didn't reply. He turned and walked out of the room, his movements stiff and mechanical. Beside him, completely invisible to his eyes, the translucent figure of Mia drifted. She watched the way his shoulders slouched, the way his fingers trembled as he pushed open the heavy double doors of the hospital. You still think I'm pretending, don't you, Dad? Mia thought, her ghostly voice leaving no echo in the quiet corridor. You think I'm just trying to steal her spotlight again? The drive back to the house was a blur of streetlights and passing headlights, casting long, skeletal shadows across the interior of the car. Tom drove in complete silence, refusing to turn on the radio, his eyes locked onto the dark asphalt ahead. Beside him, Mia sat in the passenger seat. She looked down at her hands. They were whole now, pale and clear of the horrific, weeping sores that had claimed her final moments. But when she looked at Tom, she felt the phantom sting of the salt tears on her cheeks, the agonizing heat of her skin dissolving under her own weight. As the car pulled into the driveway of their suburban New York home, the quiet of the night was shattered by the rhythmic, pulsing glow of red and blue emergency lights. 2 police cruisers were parked askew on the manicured lawn. An ambulance sat idle, its back doors open, casting a cold, white glare over the gravel. Tom's heart gave a violent, painful thud against his ribs. He stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting his face. Franklin was sitting on the curb, his head buried in his hands, his entire body shaking with silent sobs. A police officer stood over him, speaking in low, measured tones. Franklin, Tom called out, his voice cracking. The assistant looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale. He didn't say a word. He only pointed toward the front door. Tom walked up the porch steps, his legs feeling like lead. The front door was wide open. The warm, familiar scent of the house, usually filled with the gentle, clean smell of lavender and laundry detergent, was gone. In its place was a thick, heavy metallic odor that made Tom's stomach violently heave. Sir, you can't go in there right now, a young officer said, stepping into the doorway to block his path. The scene is currently being secured. I live here, Tom said, his voice rising, a desperate, hysterical edge creeping in. That's my house. My daughter is in there. The officer's expression shifted from professional detachment to grave sympathy. He looked back over his shoulder, then stepped aside. Are you Thomas Vance? Yes. I'm Detective Miller, a voice called out from the living room. A tall man in a dark trench coat walked toward the foyer, his gloved hands holding a notepad. You need to brace yourself, Mr. Vance. Tom stepped past the threshold. The white silk panels that lined the hallway, put up at astronomical expense to ensure Rose's skin would never graze bare wood or plaster, were untouched. But as Tom's eyes traveled down to the floor, his breath caught in his throat. There was a trail. It started near the kitchen, a thick, dark, smeared ribbon of crimson that looked almost black under the dim entryway light. It dragged across the polished hardwood, leaving heavy, textured wipes where a body had struggled to crawl. And at the end of the trail, just a few feet from the front door, lay a small, crumpled form. A white sheet had been draped over her, but it was already blooming with wet, dark red patches where the blood had soaked through the fabric. Mia, Tom whispered. He took a step forward, but his knees buckled. He fell to his knees, his hands landing flat on the cold floor. His palms came into contact with something wet. He pulled them back, staring in horror at the dark, sticky fluid coating his fingers. His daughter's blood. We found her about 40 minutes ago, Detective Miller said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion but heavy with accusation. Her assistant found the front door unlocked. According to the preliminary assessment by the medical examiner, she suffered from a severe, acute onset of epidermolysis bullosa. The skin on her back, her face, and her limbs had completely sheared off. She bled to death, Mr. Vance. It took hours. Tom's head spun. No. No, she didn't have it. My wife has it. Mia was healthy. The doctor said she only carried the markers. They said it might never activate. It activated, Miller said, stepping closer. He looked down at Tom with a hard, unforgiving gaze. And based on the trauma patterns, it didn't just happen on its own. There are signs of physical abuse. There is a severe hematoma on her left cheek, consistent with a heavy blow. The skin there had completely dissolved from the salt in her tears. There is another massive laceration on her back, likely caused by a violent fall against a sharp or hard surface. Do you know how she got those injuries, Mr. Vance? Tom's mind flashed back to the afternoon. He shoved her aside roughly to get to her. He grabbed a ceramic mug from the counter and hurled it at my feet. It shattered, pieces flying. How many times do I have to tell you? Do not upset your mother. Does it just go in one ear and out the other? Tom's voice died in his throat. He looked at the shattered pieces of the ceramic mug, still scattered near the kitchen island, glinting under the lights. He looked at the edge of the coffee table, where a faint, dark smear of blood marked the sharp wooden corner. He had pushed her. He had thrown the mug. He had blamed her, screamed at her, and left her on the floor to bleed while he carried his wife out of the house. She was crying, Tom whispered, his eyes wide, staring blankly at the sheet-covered body. She was just standing there. The neighbors heard screaming around 4 o'clock, Miller continued, his pen scratching against his pad. They saw you carry your wife to the car. You left the girl behind. Why didn't you call an ambulance for her? I didn't know, Tom sobbed, his chest heaving as the first real wave of agony tore through him. He reached out toward the sheeted figure, his hands shaking. I didn't know. I thought she was fine. Mia! Baby, please. Mia's ghost stood right beside him, looking down at his weeping form. She reached out, her translucent hand hovering just an inch above his shoulder. For a second, she wanted to feel the warmth of her father's touch, something she hadn't felt since she was a toddler. But as she lowered her hand, she remembered the coldness in his eyes when he had looked at her, the absolute disgust in his voice. She drew her hand back, her expression hardening into a cold, hollow mask. You're too late, Dad, she whispered. I'm already gone. The police took Tom to the station for questioning, but because of his lack of a prior criminal record and the complex medical nature of the situation, he was temporarily released on bail pending a full autopsy report and further investigation. By the time he returned to the hospital, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale, gray light over the city skyline. He walked into Rose's hospital room like a ghost himself. His clothes were stained with dried blood, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. Rose was sitting up, eating a bowl of fruit her mother had brought her. When she saw him enter, she frowned, her eyes instantly dropping to his stained clothes. Good Lord, Tom, she gasped, recoiling slightly. What is that on your shirt? Is that dirt? You look absolutely filthy. Go wash up before you come near me. Tom didn't move. He stood at the foot of the bed, his arms hanging limply at his sides. Mia is dead, he said. The words were quiet, but they seemed to freeze the air in the room. Rose paused, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. Her mother, who had been organizing some magazines on the bedside table, stopped what she was doing and turned around. What did you say? Rose asked, her voice dropping. Mia is dead, Tom repeated, his voice cracking. She's dead, Rose. She bled to death on our living room floor last night. While we were here. Rose's mother let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth. But Rose only blinked. For a brief, fleeting second, a flicker of something like shock crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. How? Rose asked, her voice remarkably steady. How could she be dead? Was it an accident? Did she do it to herself to get back at us? Tom felt a sudden, sickening jolt in his chest. Did she do it to herself? Her EB activated, Tom said, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and rising horror. The doctor we saw years ago was right. She carried the gene. The stress, the trauma, it triggered a systemic flare-up. She had a massive skin tear on her back from when she fell against the table. Her cheek was raw because he looked directly into Rose's eyes. Because you slapped her, Rose. And then I pushed her. We did this to her. That's a lie! Rose shrieked, her voice suddenly rising to a hysterical pitch. She threw her fork down, her delicate hands trembling as she clutched the sheets. How dare you blame me? She screamed at me. She provoked me. You saw her, Tom. She was trying to hurt me. She was 17, Rose. Tom roared, his voice exploding in the quiet room. She was a child. She didn't scream at you. I came down the stairs and I saw it. You hit her first. You've always hit her. You've always treated her like she was some kind of monster in our house. Tom. How can you speak to your wife like that? His mother-in-law chimed in, rushing to Rose's side to comfort her. Look at her. She's shaking. You're going to cause her skin to flare up again. Have you lost your mind? Maybe I have, Tom whispered, his shoulders slumping as the anger drained out of him, leaving only a vast, dark void of exhaustion. Maybe I lost it years ago, when I let you convince me that our daughter was the enemy. He looked at Rose, really looked at her. For 17 years, he had worshipped her. He had turned their home into a padded prison, sacrificed his daughter's talents, her dreams, her childhood, and ultimately her life, all to keep Rose safe, to keep her happy. And now, looking at the beautiful, fragile woman in the bed, he didn't see a princess anymore. He saw a parasite. I have to go back to the house, Tom said quietly. The funeral home needs me to sign the release forms. Tom, wait, Rose called out, her voice suddenly softening into a pleading, childlike whimper. She reached out her bandaged hand toward him. Don't leave me here. I'm scared. You know I can't handle this kind of stress alone. The doctors said my immune system is weak. Tom looked at her hand. The hand that had struck Mia. The hand that he had bandaged with such desperate, loving care while his daughter lay bleeding on the floor. He didn't take it. He turned his back on her and walked out of the room. The house of silk was quiet when Tom returned. The police tape had been removed from the front door, but the front yard was still littered with the tire tracks of the emergency vehicles. Inside, the heavy, metallic smell of blood had begun to settle, mixing with the stale air of a closed-up house. Tom walked into the living room. The bloodstain on the floor had dried into a dark, rusty brown crust. It stretched across the polished wood, a permanent, horrific map of Mia's final struggle. He sat down on the sofa, burying his face in his hands. In the corner of the room, Mia's ghost sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She watched him. She felt no satisfaction in his grief. The hollow ache in her own chest hadn't gone away with her death. She was still trapped here. Bound to this house, bound to the family that had destroyed her. The phone in Tom's pocket buzzed. He pulled it out with numb fingers. It was a text message from his mother-in-law. Rose is having a severe panic attack. Her skin is starting to blister. The doctors are worried about an infection. You need to come back to the hospital immediately and bring her spare medication from the cabinet. Tom stared at the screen. For 17 years, a message like this would have sent him into a blind panic. He would have dropped everything, speeding through traffic, risking his own life and the lives of others just to get to Rose's side. But now, he felt nothing. Just a deep, paralyzing cold. He slowly scrolled up through his text history. He bypassed the frantic messages from his wife and her mother, going all the way back to his messages with Mia. There were so few of them. Most of them were short, clinical commands from him. Mia, make sure the kitchen is clean before your mother gets down. Mia, don't leave your shoes in the hallway. Your mother might trip. Mia, your mother says you were playing music too loud. Turn it off. And then, his final messages to her, sent only hours before she died. Mia, your mother's condition is getting worse. I've decided to send you to a boarding school in Chicago. Pack your bags tonight. Franklin will pick you up first thing in the morning. Try to be mature about this. Tom pressed his face into his hands, his shoulders shaking as he began to sob. I'm sorry, he whispered into the empty room. I'm so sorry, Mia. I'm sorry. You're sorry now, Mia's ghost said, her voice a quiet murmur in the dark. But where were you when I was 6? Where were you when I was 10? You never looked at me, Dad. You only looked at her. The funeral was held 3 days later. It was a small, dismal affair. No one came. The rumors of the Freak family and the horrific circumstances of Mia's death had spread through the town like wildfire. The church was empty, save for Tom and his assistant, Franklin, who sat in the very back row, his head bowed in silence. Rose did not attend. She had claimed her skin was too fragile to endure the emotional strain of a funeral, and her mother had agreed, stating it would be irresponsible for Rose to risk her health for a girl who was already gone. Tom sat in the front pew, staring at the small, white casket. He looked so old. In just 3 days, his hair had streaks of gray, his face lined with deep, permanent tracks of grief and exhaustion. Mia stood beside the casket, looking down at the pale, still face of her physical body. She looked peaceful. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in pain. Her skin was smooth, free of the burning, tearing agony that had defined her existence. As the priest spoke the final blessings, Tom stood up and walked to the podium. He took a small piece of paper from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it. He looked out at the empty pews, his eyes hollow. My daughter, Mia, was a gifted artist, Tom said, his voice cracking, barely carrying over the quiet hum of the church's ventilation system. When she was 6, she was offered a scholarship to an art academy. She had professional brushes. But I threw them away. He swallowed hard, a tear spilling over his cheek. She was also a brilliant musician. She had a perfect ear. She wanted to learn the piano. But I told her no. I told her we couldn't have it in the house. I let her believe that her dreams were a threat to our family. He looked down at the paper, then crumpled it in his fist. I spent 17 years protecting a woman who didn't need protecting. I built a house of silk to keep the world out, but all I did was trap my daughter in a cage of my own making. I was so busy looking at my wife's wounds that I never saw the ones I was inflicting on my child. He stepped down from the podium, his legs trembling. He walked over to the casket, pressing his forehead against the cold white wood. I'm sorry, Mia, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. Mia watched him. For the first time, she felt a faint, gentle warmth in her chest. The anger that had kept her bound to this earth, the bitter, choking resentment that had filled her entire life, began to soften. She walked over to him, standing right beside his weeping form. She reached out and gently laid her hand over his. I forgive you, Dad, she thought, though she knew he couldn't hear her. But I can't stay. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Mia felt the heavy, invisible tether that had bound her to her father finally snap. The cold, suffocating weight of the house of silk faded away, replaced by a light, gentle breeze that seemed to lift her spirit upward. She turned her back on the cemetery, on her father, and on the tragic, broken family she had left behind. She stepped into the warm, welcoming light of the afternoon sun, fading slowly into the quiet, peaceful dark. A month after the funeral, Tom returned to the house. He had refused to see Rose since the day of Mia's death. She had sent him hundreds of messages, alternating between furious threats of divorce and pathetic, tearful pleas for him to come home and take care of her. But Tom had ignored them all. He walked into the living room, carrying a heavy metal crowbar. He looked at the white silk panels lining the walls. The expensive, delicate fabric that had cost him his life savings, his daughter's happiness, and his own soul. With a low, guttural roar, Tom slammed the crowbar into the wall, tearing through the silk and the plaster beneath. He ripped the fabric down in long, violent shreds, exposing the rough splintered wood of the studs. He smashed the pristine, padded furniture, throwing the expensive silk cushions into a pile in the center of the room. He broke the light fixtures, shattered the mirrors, and tore down the heavy silk drapes, letting the harsh, unshielded sunlight flood into the room. He worked for hours, until his hands were raw and bleeding, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. When he was finished, the house of silk was gone. In its place was a hollow, ruined shell of a home, littered with the debris of his own delusions. Tom sat down in the middle of the wreckage, his bleeding hands resting on his knees. He looked up at the ceiling, where the sun cast long, bright streaks of light across the ruined walls. For the first time in 17 years, the air in the house felt clean. He closed his eyes, listening to the quiet rustle of the wind through the broken windows, and finally, let the tears fall.